Hey guys, and welcome back to Monka, where activities occur, but yesterday I beat a game, and so I kind of want to talk about because I have a lot of lingering thoughts about this game, and to be honest, it's kind of been a hot topic, or at least it was a hot topic a few months ago, and so I kind of wanted to put my opinion out there because I feel like it's a very interesting land for this game. But yesterday night I beat Sonic Frontiers on the Nintendo Switch. As well as coming out on the Nintendo Switch, it also came out on the Xbox, PlayStation, and as well on PC via Steam. It came out in November of 2022. It was published by Sega and developed by Sonic Team, both companies that have pedigrees that really I don't need to explain the background for. But yeah, like I said, this has been a very polarizing game, or at least it was a polarizing game when it came out in November of 2022. The scores I saw ranged anywhere from a 1 out of 10 to like a 9 out of 10, saying that this game was just another trash Sonic game to this is one of the best Sonic games ever made. Kind of crazy of a score, which is kind of what drove me to play it, because I was like, man, there's just a lot of shit surrounding this game. And so I kind of wanted to see what my opinion was, and to be honest, I enjoy Sonic enough, but I've kind of had a rocky relationship with Sonic. The last Sonic game I really enjoyed was Sonic Generations, and I can't even remember how long that came out, but it was on the Xbox 360, so I believe it's been like 12 years, so it's been a hell of a long time since I've actually enjoyed a Sonic game. But nonetheless, I've always enjoyed Sonic either way, even if Sonic's entries more recently have been kind of mediocre, to be honest. I pretty much grew up on Sonic. I mean, I played Sonic and Sonic 2 on a Tube TV on the Sega Genesis and absolutely still love Sonic 2 to death. It's still my favorite Sonic game. But overall, the long and the short of my opinion on Sonic Frontiers at the very least is, you know, I had a lot of mixed opinions about this game at points. At the beginning, I thought I wouldn't really like it, and then I got into it, and then I kind of started to suss out the flaws. And you know, the end opinion that I hold is that Sonic Frontiers is a damn good game, and it is a fun time. It is a really fun game. It does a lot of ambitious shit, and it pays off, to be honest, because it creates a really fun and unique Sonic experience that really has never happened, especially for a 3D Sonic game. And it's probably, besides like Boost era Prime Sonic, like shit like Generations, is probably the best 3D Sonic game to be made as of current. It's kind of a shame that it took them like 24 years to kind of figure out something that worked besides Boost era Sonic, but nonetheless, this is a damn fun game. Even if you don't enjoy Sonic, you might enjoy this game, but it's pretty much, besides Sonic Generations, my favorite 3D Sonic game to be made. This is a fun game. Now, is it without its flaws? No, it does have flaws to it, but it is still a damn fine time. But in terms of the graphics and performance, on the Nintendo Switch, Sonic Frontiers doesn't look all that great, to be honest, but I don't really give a shit about graphics, so that doesn't really bother me. The thing that people complained about the most really was pop-in, and I can see that being a problem for like collectibles and shit. When you're out of range of a collectible, it kind of stays out of the pop-in until you get closer. That's really the only thing I can complain about in terms of graphics, because when that happens, it kind of makes the collectathon hunting that can happen in this game kind of annoying, but that's the only thing I can complain about graphics. In terms of performance, this game performs just fine. I think it holds about a steady 30 FPS, but it never breaks that, and it never hits a frame dip. I can't recall a single time that this game ever dropped below 30 frames per second, so it runs just fine. It runs stable, and honestly, it looks fine to me. Even though some people won't like the look, you're playing on a Nintendo Switch for the graphics, or at least I did. So of course there's going to be limitations when compared to something like a PS5 that's like souped up to shit, but in terms of the graphics do what they're supposed to do, and they look fine. The performance as well held its own, and it just stays a solid 30, and it runs fine for a Switch game, to be honest. But in terms of the music in this game goes both ways, to be honest. For the island overtures, as you can call them, for roaming the islands, they're kind of just chill songs that are just kind of they're just kind of chill violin songs or chill whatever songs. They don't do a whole hell of a lot for me. As well, the emotional type of songs don't do a whole hell of a lot for me, but they do set the mood for emotional scenes, and they do their part for that at least. But where this game really shines in the soundtrack, and when I say really shine, I mean this fucking soundtrack bangs for these, is the boss fight soundtrack and the cyberspace soundtracks. The cyberspace music absolutely fucking slaps. It is just so hype that I just can't even, like, it'll be playing in the background for sure, but it is just such a banger of mixes of like electro and like EDM sounding shit that it just sounds so good. It sounds so like refreshing as well for like a game music. Honestly, just a banger of a soundtrack that's really just amped up. It sounds really good. The cyberspace songs are just really amped and really good. And honestly, it's just like a banger of a soundtrack for at least the cyberspace parts. The cyberspace songs sound a lot different from the other side of this soundtrack that's a banger, which are the boss fights. The boss fights actually go for more of like a metal sound with vocals, but it's just really amped up, and it really takes that strength of like what the cyberspace had with being amped up, and really it just kind of amps you up with all the heavy metal and shit that just like gets you pumped up during a boss fight just to whoop the boss's ass. Kind of like a Yakuza game, how they did their soundtrack. When they play a song and you get pumped to beat someone's ass, it's kind of like that for the boss fights in this game as well. The songs just get you pumped to beat the fuck out of the bosses. But besides that, the game does have a jukebox, which is kind of cheating because it's just a mix of a lot of old songs, whether it's from CD or Colors or 06. Pretty much every Sonic game has some mix of a soundtrack in the jukebox, but it makes the open world roaming parts a bit more bearable because you don't have to listen to the overture. You can just listen to songs from the jukebox. The jukebox has all good songs from previous Sonic games, so there is nothing to complain about there, but like I said, that's kind of cheating. But in terms of the soundtrack, the mellow shit is kind of boring, which is pretty much the open world overtures and the kind of melodic emotional shit, but the cyberspace songs are absolutely pumped and amped with a mix of like EDM inspirations and even like drum and bass and shit like that, and like dubstep. Like, it has a lot of inspirations, but it absolutely fucking slaps, and the boss fights get you pumped to just beat the fuck out of the enemy. So overall, the soundtrack is pretty good. It really shines for cyberspace and the boss fights though. But in terms of the story and characters, this is a bit of a weird point of contention because honestly the story doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense until the end. But pretty much the story starts out as Sonic and company, which includes Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, are headed to a set of islands called the Starfall Islands because they detected the Chaos Emeralds there. Now, where they are coming from or where they picked up from, I'm not exactly sure. This might be Falling Forces, but it really doesn't explain that all that much. And to be honest, it doesn't explain the story a whole hell of a lot either. But in that point of going to the Starfall Islands, they get sucked into cyberspace. But pretty much Amy, Knuckles, and Tails all get stuck in cyberspace while Sonic is able to escape the cyberspace and make it to the islands. As well, Eggman is trapped in cyberspace, which is kind of lightly explained near the beginning, but while he is trapped in cyberspace, he uses an AI called Sage to pretty much harass Sonic and to stop him on his goal from pretty much defeating all the Titans on the islands and freeing his friends from this kind of weird in-between dimension of being trapped in cyberspace, but as well being in the real world. It's kind of a confusing story and a kind of convoluted story. Playing it through, it felt like I was missing something, and I don't know if I was missing something, but I don't think this was ever explained in a previous game, which makes it kind of weird to feel like I was missing something. Like I said, they do explain it near the end, but it is just kind of a weird convoluted story until then, but it is still nonetheless enjoyable and kind of intriguing. The story is fine, just know if you're jumping into it. They do make references to previous Sonic games and shit like that, and it'll be kind of confusing. I don't know if Sonic fans get it more than I do. I do get the point of like some of it, but some of it also doesn't make sense just because it's kind of convoluted and confusing. But the characters are what they are, to be honest. You already know the characters, you know Sonic, you know Eggman. They do try to take a more of a matured approach though, and that's kind of weird because it feels like they swapped out some of the voice actors for that to be more matured feeling. Now, Knuckles and Tails and Eggman, they all retain their voice actors and they've been the same, but Amy and Sonic switch out their voice actors. Sonic goes from this kind of more like, gotta go fast, and you know, all that shit that you know Sonic for previously, to a more kind of laid back character that's more matured, and that kind of bleeds into the story where their characters are coming off as more matured, and as well the story seems like it's trying to become more matured as well. But that kind of plays off this weird feeling that they also tried to hang on to that kind of goofy atmosphere that Sonic usually gives off, but the characters are more matured. They are still pretty simple though, but they kind of rest on the laurels that they've been built over the last maybe I don't know how many years that they've been building these characters. You kind of know who they already are and they don't really change all that much. The new character Sage is kind of interesting, but at the same time that character is kind of shallow. Throughout the game she's not given enough time to be really built up, but you still kind of like her throughout the game. But I do think the voice actor change is kind of weird. I don't mind it all that much, but the first time I heard Sonic it immediately threw me off because I knew that was what I was used to hearing Sonic sound like. But I do dig the more matured approach that they're going for, even if it is kind of weird weird, but overall the story and characters are fine. Just know that the story is kind of convoluted, and the characters, like I said, they're just kind of what you know, kind of taken to a more mature vibe though. But in terms of the gameplay, starting off, it took me roughly around 24 hours to beat the game, which is on the longer side for a Sonic game, to be honest. I know that Sonic 06 took me around 25 hours in that range as well, but usually Sonic games only take like 5 to 10 hours to beat, so it is a pretty long Sonic game. It only slightly feels like it overstays its welcome, but it does cut off at a pretty good point. The main loop of the game is that you'll be playing through 5 islands that are kind of open-ended, which is where this game kind of earned its Sonic Breath of the Wild title that it earned from all of its previews, but the game really is more than that. You will be exploring 5 islands. One of the islands is simply a story point that goes by really fast, but otherwise the loop is pretty much exploration, platforming, and combat. Now the 5 islands themselves, I can kind of complain about this because I feel like there isn't a whole hell of a lot of variety within the islands. 3 of the islands are kind of like this green, luscious, mountainous forest type of vibe to them, that kind of what people are comparing to Breath of the Wild. And the other 2, one is a desert and one's kind of like a volcano mountainous area. The variety kind of lacks. I wish there was more variety within these islands, because they could have done something different. They could have done like an ice mountain, or maybe more of a, I don't know, like technological island, maybe something more futuristic, like a chemical plant or something like that. The weird kind of sticking to that green, luscious, mountainous, but also foresty vibe that they go with for 3 maps is kind of weird. It makes it feel kind of repetitive as well when you're not having that interjected variety into it. But as well, I should also mention the aesthetic of the game is overall realistic besides the cartoony characters. All 5 of these maps go for more of a realistic vibe to them, which is kind of weird for a Sonic game. I'm not bashing it, to be honest, but it does come off as kind of weird when you have this kind of a really realistic setting contrasted by these kind of cartoony characters. But as well, everything pretty much in the environments as well is within that range of being realistic. Now combat is pretty much one of the most interesting things in this game, because honestly they go for a different vibe in terms of the combat. The combat actually is kind of more fleshed out than it's ever been in a Sonic game before, and it's a hell of a lot of fun too. It goes more from like an ARPG vibe, to where Sonic doesn't just do a regular spin dash, but he can upgrade his abilities to do more crazy shit like throwing attacks or doing ranged attacks on enemies. As well, the enemy variety plays into kind of this combat being more interesting, because it looked slow within the previews. I agree with people, it looked kind of lame, but in reality when you actually get into the game, the combat is a lot faster paced than that, and it's a hell of a lot of fun too. Like I said, they really play into this more fast paced ARPG vibe, and it's really enjoyable, to be honest. The combat is just a hell of a lot of fun, and as well with the Titans, the combat is a lot of fun, because the Titans are what a lot of people would have seen in the previews of like these boss fights, or like even call them mini boss fights, to be honest. But you do a whole hell of a lot of unique shit with them, whether you're doing stuff like throwing attacks at this almost caterpillar like enemy to keep knocking it down to attack its head, or like you saw in the previews, running up an enemy's arm to get to its head to attack its weak point. It does a lot of weird shit like Shadow of the Colossus. Some of these boss fights as well feel kind of recycled. If you previously played a Sonic game, I did recognize some influences for some bosses from previous Sonic games, but to say the least, they're a hell of a lot of fun, at least up front. Now, the vibe that goes on throughout the islands is the boss fights get less and less creative as you go, which is kind of disappointing. The first island is kind of like the peak of the boss fights, where you got a lot of unique ones, like I said, running up an enemy's arm to attack its weak points. It is kind of unfortunate that that enemy variety does kind of get duller as the game goes on, but it is a really cool system to fight these big boss fights, and they can be pretty hype as well. But in terms of combat as well, you do gain experience from doing combat, which you can put into a skill tree system that really unlocks Sonic's abilities to do a lot of crazy shit in this game. Like I said, you're not spin dashing, you're also throwing like light waves and dodging around and like throwing a whole hell of a lot of like flashy moves and shit. So it's actually really cool for the combat, because you can actually upgrade Sonic to do a lot more cool shit. One of the problems with that though is that it's kind of shallow for the combat. You can unlock everything by the 3rd island, and there's only 5 islands, so it can feel kind of shallow, but at the same time that gives you kind of access to all the moves early game, which makes the game a lot more fun. But in terms of the platforming and really in general, I'll just kind of go over the controls. The controls are pretty good, to be honest, for a Sonic game. Sonic Team still hasn't perfected the controls for Sonic. There is some clunkiness here, and it is pretty apparent. Like, platforming is still kind of frustrating, and I still notice that some kind of frustrations that I had from previous Sonic games are still present here. Like, you can still dash off an edge pretty easily. Doing jumps jumps can feel kind of weird and pinpointy, to be honest. The controls for Sonic still aren't as tight as I'd like them to be. I hope for at least the next game, I hope Sonic Team just really goes in and perfecting and like nailing the controls for Sonic, but Sonic controls pretty well nonetheless and feels fine. He just isn't perfect yet, and the controls can still feel kind of awkward at points. But as for the controls for when you're exploring the world, they do pretty well, to be honest, and Sonic feels pretty good when you're exploring. Now, it is worth mentioning that up front for the game, it gives you two options between control presets, which is high speed and action. I highly recommend going with high speed because pretty much that's what you're going to want from a Sonic game. As far as I know, the action setting pulls back like the speed sliders, so you're not going to be going as fast, and it's more like action oriented, and that's really not what Sonic's about, so I'd recommend going with a high speed setting. Even then, you can adjust the sliders within the menus to tweak it to how you like it, but I picked high speed, and that's what I stuck with for settings all throughout the game, and I think that's what everyone should do, to be honest. But in terms of the platforming segments, there's kind of two platforming segments, or two parts to a platforming segment. There's the platforming segments in the open world, and there's kind of platforming in cyberspace. The open world platforming is pretty good, to be honest. It usually kind of takes the 2D approach to it, having the camera locked to like a 2D form. In the beginning of the game, it kind of does it in more of a 3D open-ended setting, but once you get closer to the end of the game, it does the 2D platforming. And to be honest, it feels fine. I enjoyed it enough. I kind of got annoyed at points that it would lock me so often to the 2D camera for platforming when I'm climbing like towers and shit. But as well, there is another section to the platforming, which is kind of comes into the exploration, which is cyberspace. Now, cyberspace are these portals that you will be going into to pretty much collect keys to collect the Chaos Emeralds to progress the game. These cyberspace segments are pretty much Sonic Generation Boost Era levels that are pretty much recognizable from Boost Era Sonic. They also have settings from Boost Era Sonic as well, like the level settings will be like you'll be jumping into cyberspace in a kind of modified green hill zone, or you'll be jumping into cyberspace into a modified chemical plant, or a modified sky temple, or any sort of inspirations from previous Sonic games. It is pretty fun though. I do enjoy that kind of throwback to Boost Era in the cyberspace areas. If you didn't like Boost Era Sonic though, it is kind of a point of complaint, I imagine, for some, and it is kind of recycling some of that Boost Era Sonic, but it is a lot of fun, and I enjoy Boost Era Sonic, so I enjoyed the cyberspace levels. It does do the 3D Boost Era as well as 2D Boost Era in the cyberspace levels, but cyberspace kind of bleeds into the exploration part of this game, which is you pretty much dive into cyberspace to collect keys to collect the Chaos Emeralds. Now, the exploration part of this game is a whole hell of a lot of a collectathon, to be honest, but I'd like to state up front that the exploration of the levels is actually a hell of a lot of fun, and honestly, I'd find myself dashing around and having a hell of a lot of fun just honestly exploring the open worlds, because they're a lot of fun. Sonic is fast enough in these open worlds that it's just fun to just dash around and go really fast in the worlds, because that's just how Sonic is. He goes fast. But it is worth mentioning in the open world exploration parts that a lot of what I saw from the previews and a lot of what people put a bad taste in their mouths was that it looked like it would be a slow Sonic game in these open worlds, which it is absolutely not. And as well, it looked like it was empty and there wouldn't be a lot to do. These 2 points of contention are absolutely false, and they do not pan out in the final game. Sonic goes fast in the open worlds, and as well, there's a lot to do. They designed these open worlds to keep you continuously moving fast and to keep you continuously within the action, whether it's doing a whole bunch of platforming or other shit, to be honest. The whole point of contention about this game being slow or this game being empty are absolutely false. The game is not slow because you can dash really fast, and as well, there's just a lot in these open worlds that they just packed it with a whole shit ton of stuff to do. But the exploration pretty much takes on a collectathon. The gameplay loop is to collect the 8 Chaos Emeralds across 4 of the islands. One of the islands is just a story point, so they don't really have any collectathon there, to be honest, but that's pretty much the loop of the game, is that you're going to be collecting the 8 Chaos Emeralds and then fighting the boss of the island before moving on to the next island. Now, within that, there's a lot to do, like defeating the Titans, which are like the mini bosses, to collect the keys to go into the portals, to be able to collect the other keys to be able to unlock the Chaos Emeralds. Like I said, this game is kind of a collectathon. As well, you can collect memory shards within the levels to talk to the characters within the levels, and as well, there's other collectibles like power-up seeds, which can increase your attack and defense, or the Coco, which are kind of like this game's Chow, which can increase your speed and ring capacity. You can also collect songs in the open world for the jukebox, but kind of getting into the attack, defense, ring capacity, and speed aspect though, there is kind of a light RPG element to this game as well. You can collect attack seeds to boost your attack up to level 99, and all of them go up to level 99, but you can boost your defense, which will determine how many rings you'll lose from taking damage, as well as you can boost your speed to go faster, and you can boost your ring capacity so you can hold more rings, so when you take damage, you can just have more life, essentially. In this game, your rings act more like a life meter, than instead of taking a hit and just losing all your rings, you take a hit and you lose some rings, and you take a hit and you lose some rings. It's kind of interesting how they introduce an RPG aspect into this game, but I like it, and to be honest, I like collecting shit, so the collectathon part of this game was a lot of fun to me, but the exploration is done really well. I think it was done a lot better than people thought it was going to be done, because the previews for this game did it no justice in making it look like a terrible game, and it's really one of the reasons I put off playing this game for so long. The previews on IGN First and all of that shit looked terrible and did this game a huge disservice in selling it. Like I said, it looked terrible, but the exploration is fun. The gameplay loop is fun. Just the game in general is fun though, with everything considered though, because the exploration is a lot of fun, just running around the islands and collecting shit. Hopping to cyberspace is fun. They do have a fishing minigame in this game. While I usually don't like fishing minigames, honestly in this game it's kind of a lot of fun. You can also collect voice logs from Dr. Eggman that kind of build on the lore of the game, which is kind of cool. But the fishing game is also pretty chill, and what I forgot to mention is that the song for the fishing minigame is pretty good too. They actually do a very lo-fi inspired song for the fishing minigame, and it's actually pretty good, but overall the gameplay is really solid. Now, is it perfect? No. I think the islands needed more variety, or if they do this type of game again, they need to add more variety to the islands. The gameplay can feel like it can kind of drag on at some points, but that kind of was me just collecting everything. As well, Sonic doesn't control the best, but he does control pretty well, to be honest. But the gameplay overall is pretty solid, and I enjoyed it enough to where the gameplay, like I said, has 3 different points to it: combat, exploration, and platforming, and it really just melds into a really unique Sonic experience that honestly I don't think they can go back to doing Sonic how he previously did unless they do like another Sonic Mania, because this concept is really unique and it just adds enough variety that makes Sonic Frontiers a really fun game and just makes it like a hell of a time and really enjoyable. But overall, in terms of my opinions on Sonic Frontiers, Salad Frontiers is a really solid game. Honestly, it's a hell of a lot of fun too. My opinion on it throughout playing it kind of went up and down. For the first 4 hours, I had a lot of mixed opinions, and I feel like if you have a hard time through the first 4 hours, I would say give it 5 hours. I think it will grow on you, because those first hours are really rough, because you go through a lot of emotions of being like, well, this seems like it might be boring, to this doesn't seem like a Sonic game at all and I don't know what they're trying to do, to, oh, I'm starting to kind of get what they're going for, to, oh, this is actually something completely unique, and it might not be traditional Sonic, but it still is a hell of a lot of fun. So I'd say stick through the first 5 hours. My first 5 hours were kind of, you know, like I said, all over the place, but I eventually got there. But even with those first 5 hours being rough, I still couldn't put the game down. Those first 5 hours were all played consecutively. I played 5 hours in a row, and I had by the end of it recognized that I was having fun. But like I said, Sonic Frontiers is a hell of a lot of fun. I definitely recommend playing it if you're into platformers. It might be weird if you don't like Sonic, because still technically this is a Sonic game, but they do enough different to where it feels unique from any other Sonic game I've ever played before. I got the game personally for $40. I think it's gone for lower than that. I think $40 is a fair price for this experience that took me around 24 hours. As well, on that point, you can beat it faster in 24 hours. I would imagine you could probably beat the game within 15 to 20. I just really took my time on it and enjoyed it. And to be honest, I just wanted to collect everything and do everything that I could in this game. But Sonic Frontiers is really fun. It's kind of a fresh breath of air for Sonic, and honestly, I'm excited to see what they do next with the series, because this is a really good game, and it does so much unique for the Sonic series that I think that if they build off of this, they can make a game that really shines. Like I said, this game has its flaws, but it's still a really fun game. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you. Stay chill.